back. It's Daybreak on Trust Television. If you're just joining, the program started since 8 a.m. And if you've missed any part of the program, of course, you can follow us across all of our social platforms and also join our live stream on Facebook and YouTube for more news programs and also documentaries. So this is the discussion segment of the program. And of course, some of you may have wondered, why is the weather getting hotter and hotter? I mean, it's supposed to be Harmattan season here in the FCT. Once is approaching around 12 noon, going towards 1 p.m. thereabouts, the weather becomes really sunny and really hot. Some would say, well, the Harmattan season has not started yet, but we're seeing temperatures really high and the sun really bright and shining. Some would also say this is because of the changing climate situation. Yes, now on the 11th of November, the UN Climate Change Conference 29 kicks off. And also, delegates from around the world will convene in Baku, Azerbaijan, for 2 weeks of crucial negotiations, dynamic discussions, and global collaboration, all focused on tackling the climate crisis with urgency and ambition. But the key focus out of these priority areas will be finance, as trillions of dollars are required for countries to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions and protect lives and livelihoods from the worsening impact of climate change. Now, joining us in the studio this morning to provide, of course, some perspectives and also analysis as we unpack this topic is Mr. Kenneth Akpan. He is the Climate Justice Coordinator at Oxfam, Nigeria. Mr. Kenneth, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
So,
thank you for having me.
Perhaps I should start by saying, what are your expectations? Of course, not from the conference, first of all, but from the outlook of the weather forecast over the course of the last, 8, 9, 10 months, going forward as we gradually change seasons into the dry season?
Yeah, first and foremost, I must say that the weather patterns due to climate change are very unpredictable. Most times, these predictions from NIMET have come out, yes, but we have seen slight changes in some of those predictions coming to reality. This is not no fault of theirs, but actually the impact and the true reality of climate change bearing on us. And this is one issue that we need to take seriously. Farmers could go to the farm, they will plan, but the weather will fail them. So that is why everybody needs to take climate change very seriously.
Now, Mr. Kenneth, is this the consequences of our own actions, or are we probably bearing the brunt of the actions of others?
Yeah, this is Africa, this is Nigeria. We, as Africans in general, will say we have contributed little or less than 4% of the whole causes of this climate change. But we are bearing more of the brunt. Why? Because there are so many gaps on our side: preparedness, the ability to weather, the ability to adopt, and all this is anchored on financing. So that is why it is very difficult for Africans to adapt to these changes.
Now, finance seems to be the key focus of the COP29. What are the expectations in terms of generation, distribution, and implementation of some of the policies that we might see emerge from the COP29?
Yeah, but the COP29, luckily, is going to talk mainly on finance, which has actually been the bone of contention going forward to addressing climate change and the impact of climate change on most especially the third world or the African countries. Going to COP29, we should go with expectations. But most times these policies, these declarations are made, but the implementation is actually and always the bone of contention. So our expectation should be, we're going forward, we're going to COP, let's go with a strong sense of having to stamp our feet on the ground as Africans. I'm saying this to the African group of negotiators. We should be more vocal in demanding for climate finance, for loss and damage, for mitigation. There are so many angles of it, and we should try as much as possible not to lose focus from the main thing, whereby these climate finances are being merged into one one finance thing, but they are not being, contextualized. We have loss and damage. This is something that must be addressed and should not be lumped up with the general climate finance focus. That is my message to us going out there.
All right, then. Now, just before now, we had a phone-in segment where Nigerians called in to share their thoughts on a lot of developments. But then today we focused on the issue of importation of petrol, or focusing on the refining capacity of the Dangote refinery. Now, I'm dragging this into the conversation because these are the kind of conversations that Nigerians are having currently now to run businesses, to run their lives on a daily basis and the likes of it. This shows how over-dependent or over-reliant that Nigerians are of fossil fuels, of course. Now, how do we begin to navigate these issues of moving to cleaner energy when, even in the first place, the government has been touting a transition from fossil fuels to CNG, but we've not seen that really take off. So, in what ways can we advance all of this at the COP that makes it more understandable, the plight of and the challenges that real Nigerians face on a daily? Should, for example, there be a policy that says phase out the use of fossil fuels completely in the next maybe 5 years? Is that sustainable?
Of course, we have those targets already in our NDCs, yeah. But that is where we talk about just energy transition. And that is why, as Oxfam, we are insisting on the energy transition being very just in the sense that you have to consider those economies like Nigeria that is heavily dependent on fossil fuel for development. It has to be just because most of these economies that have developed, the developed nations, developed their economies on the back of fossil fuel. And now it is the turn of most of these African countries who are heavily reliant on it. Their economies are reliant on it, and you're telling us that we have to phase out. So we are saying, yes, we have to phase out, but this phasing out has to be just. We have to take into consideration the human rights angle of it, the economic angle of energy transition. Those people that will lose their jobs, for example, economies that will depend on fossil fuel, for example, what are they going to fall back on? What is that? So that is why we keep insisting on just energy transition, loss and damage. This climate finance must be there to support these economies. For example, you made mention of the CNG transitioning and all of that. Nigeria is using natural gas as transition fuel, just to tell you how serious the government is. But the capacity to transition is not there because we need more financing. It needs serious financing to build infrastructures that can contain or absorb that shock. These are what we should take to COP.
All right. Yeah. Now, Mr. Kenneth, when you talk about COP29 and climate change, you begin to hear new lingos. Talk about green taxonomy, universal green taxonomy, and of course, driving meaningful change in terms of sustainable investment. Now, how does this really benefit developing countries?
Yeah, so we come to talk about Article 6.2 and Article 6.4.
Of course.
Whereby we are talking about how bilaterally countries can engage in how they can buy carbon credits and all that to offset their own carbon credit. We have a case in Uganda, for example, where some of these African countries, the Arab Emirates, has bought vast lands to live up to that 6.2. But our take is that this, if it is not done properly, as the 6.4 would say, a structure whereby local people are carried along, there is no greenwashing, it is transparent for people to understand why this is, not the fact that people will grab your land, because it could just come up as a land grabbing form, where lands are being grabbed. You can't grow your food anymore because you're trying to, offset somebody's energy or carbon credit. All of this is something that education, transparency, and understanding of the African people, most especially the very vulnerable, the community-based people, the CSOs, should understand and be part of this process. Because if there's no transparency, there will be no trust. And Africa might be as another slave trade, because we've had it every time Africa comes up to show the responsibility of the continent, and then this could just be another form of trading our best resources for peanuts or nothing.
All right. Now, I mean, bearing all of this, where does awareness and education come to play a role, especially talking about the African population?
You know your rights is the first step. And in Oxfam, we believe in what we call climate justice. We even have a dedicated field we call climate justice, gender justice. This is an avenue whereby we educate people at the community level, let them know their rights, have a say, and also be at the negotiation table. I lead a project called the African Activists for Climate Justice for Nigeria. It's a Pan-African project whereby the basic objective is to amplify the voices of Africans so that we can sit on the negotiation table from the local government to the state to the federal and to global discourse where climate change is being discussed. We should be at the table. The vulnerable people who are being impacted and affected by this crisis should be at the table. That's why even for this week, we are running what we call the African Climate Caravan, whereby all of this engagement, we are gathering stories from across Nigeria, whereby we hope to amplify all of that at COP29 to tell the people how it bites us here.
Now, for some of those who might have been for the longest of time using or burning carbon materials, talk about firewood, charcoal, and the likes of that, most of them would say this has been their only source of heat for cooking and for other requirements that they would need heat for. It's going to be a hard sell, isn't it, to tell them, look, this is damaging or this is affecting the climate. Why would you tell me about that when I'm talking about something that will affect my stomach? So what are the ways or the plans that one would expect to see the gradual phase out? I mean, it's one thing to educate, it's another thing to provide a substitute and alternatives for them to go ahead living their lives as normal. How do we come about addressing this issue?
We have been in the field actually addressing that. First and foremost, you tell me not to use fossil fuel. I ask you the question, how do you want me to feed? It's basic. So there must be the alternative. And the federal government has tried in our own way, for example, providing energy saving stoves, whereby it reduces the number of firewood that goes out there. But I have a problem with that. We have provided many stoves, but the fuel for these stoves has always been the challenge. So we've gone to the field, we have met community women, we've tried to see how we can help them produce briquettes from waste around them, farm waste and all of that. So this could just be an alternative, and these women have adopted to it. They're looking at it as something that can even go commercial. We usually have a lot of farm waste post-harvest. What happens to them? We have rice husk out there. We can make this into briquettes that can actually benefit. So what I'm saying is the government can also work hand in hand with institutions, universities, colleges of education, polytechnics, to, go into mass production of alternatives to firewood. Because if you go to Nasarawa State, for example, there are communities that the trees have gone because people, even on the street, you see these firewoods are coming out. And most times they are going to the urban centers. Most times, even the food you ate this morning on the street might just have been made from firewood. We should also be conscious of where does your source of energy comes from. But the government has to double up in all of that. But doubling up also still falls back to climate financing, which is a big gap.
So now tell us about where political and government will comes to play in this. I mean, because it's literally the cement that binds everything together.
Yeah.
And how confident you are that we'll be seeing such from the Nigerian end of things.
Yeah, from the Nigerian end of things, I must commend Nigerian government. They have tried to even passing the Climate Change Act and all of that. It shows commitment. But I think policy implementation is what we should be looking at. Taking stock, monitoring impacts, assessing how far we have gone, how well we are doing. This is something that must be on the table. It's not just about policies, but how do these policies, and the policies must not just hang at the federal level. It must go down to the state, to the local government, at the grassroots, because policies, if not domesticated or accepted at that level, we will not achieve, the federal government cannot achieve this on our own. So there must be need for that synergy for policies to come alive. Yes.
Well, it's been an absolutely interesting and educative conversation with Mr. Kenneth Akpan, the Climate Justice Coordinator of Oxfam in Nigeria, who I would say has done justice to the conversation this morning as we talk about climate change and what to expect as the Conference of Parties, the 29th edition of the Conference of Parties, kicks off in Baku, Azerbaijan. I hope for those of us who watched the program from, of course, the discussion segment up until this point, have been able to get one or two away from his submissions on the need why African Nigerians particularly also need to do their bit to ensure an improvement on the world's climate, because as you know, they call it global warming because the world is getting warmer, but it's also called climate change. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation, Mr. Kenneth.
Thank you very much for
Yes, indeed. And we do hope to have you again after COP29 to see whether we could talk about an assessment, of course, on some of the conversations during the conference, indeed.
Sure. Thank you.
Yes, of course. And now we go on a quick break. And when we return, Daybreak continues. Stay with us.